The diary fell open on October 15th, and Sarah Chen's world shattered. Emma's secrets spilled across the pages in purple ink. Mom doesn't see it. Emma's careful handwriting read, the letters pressed deep into the page with the urgency only desperation could create. When Dad comes into my room at night, she's always asleep, always taking those pills. I am always so tired from work. He knows exactly when. He counts her breathing. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Sarah's vision blurred, but she forced herself to keep reading, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird fighting for escape. The October afternoon light filtering through Emma's gauze curtains seemed suddenly foreign, casting shadows that stretched across walls covered with her daughter's artwork, watercolor paintings of doorways that never quite opened, of figures running toward horizons that remained perpetually out of reach. It started when I was 13, the entry continued, and Sarah felt her knees buckle. She sank onto Emma's unmade bed, the same bed where she'd read bedtime stories about brave princesses and happy endings, the same bed where she'd kissed scraped knees and chased away monsters from under the mattress. Never knowing that the monster lived down the hall, sharing her own bed, bringing her coffee every morning with that gentle smile that had once made her feel so loved, so protected. The house felt different now, as if the very foundations had shifted beneath her feet. Every creak of the settling wood seemed ominous, every familiar sound transformed into something sinister. The family photos lining the hallway, Mark's arm around both of them at Emma's 8th grade graduation, all three of them laughing at last year's beach vacation, now felt like evidence of a lie so profound, it made her question her own sanity. How had she missed it? How had she been so blind? Sarah's mind raced backward through the past 2 years, searching for signs she should have seen. Emma's sudden quietness during family dinners, the way she'd started wearing oversized sweaters even in summer heat, how she'd stopped bringing friends over, stopped talking about boys, stopped talking about much of anything at all. Sarah had attributed it to typical teenage behavior, to the natural growing pains of adolescence. She'd been working 60-hour weeks at the law firm, taking on extra cases to help pay for Emma's college fund, coming home exhausted and grateful that Mark was there to handle dinner, homework help, the bedtime routine. The irony tasted like poison in her mouth. She'd been working so hard to secure Emma's future that she'd failed to protect her present. Another entry, dated 3 months ago. He says if I tell anyone, especially Mom, it will destroy our family. He says Mom loves him more than she loves me, and she'll choose his side. He says no one will believe me anyway, because he's never hurt me, not really. Just touching. Just our secret. But it feels like dying every time. Sarah's neighbor, Helen Rodriguez, had been the one to call that morning. I saw Emma walking down Maple Street around 6 a.m. with a backpack, Helen had said, her voice tight with concern. She looked like she was crying. Sarah, is everything okay? Helen had been their neighbor for 8 years, had watched Emma grow from a gap-toothed 7-year-old into the beautiful, intelligent young woman who'd vanished sometime between midnight and dawn, leaving behind only this diary and a note that read, I can't stay here anymore. Don't look for me, I'm sorry. But Emma hadn't taken the diary with her, and Sarah understood why now. It was evidence. It was the truth she'd been too afraid to speak aloud, written in purple ink on pages that smelled faintly of the jasmine perfume Sarah had bought her for her 15th birthday. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the roof like accusations. Sarah thought of Mark at his office downtown, probably sitting in his ergonomic chair, reviewing contracts with the same methodical precision he brought to everything in his life. The same precision, she now realized, that he'd applied to destroying their daughter's innocence while Sarah slept just 3 rooms away, medicated into oblivion by the anxiety medication her doctor had prescribed when work stress began keeping her awake. Dr. Patricia Weinstein, Emma's pediatrician since birth, had commented at Emma's last checkup about how withdrawn she seemed. Teenage girls often go through phases, she'd said. But Sarah remembered now the way Dr. Weinstein's eyes had lingered on Emma's face, The gentle questions about school, friends, home life. Had she suspected something? Had she been trying to give Emma an opening to speak? And then there was Father Miguel from St. Catherine's, where they attended Sunday Mass as a family. Just last month, he'd pulled Sarah aside after service to mention that Emma had been asking about confession, about forgiveness, about whether God could love someone who was, quote, "twoot, too dirty to be saved." Sarah had laughed it off as teenage drama, maybe some small transgression like cheating on a test or lying about curfew. The memory made her sick now. The diary contained months of entries, pages and pages of her daughter's private agony. Sarah read about Emma lying awake, listening for Mark's footsteps in the hallway, about the excuses she made to sleep at friends' houses, about the way she'd started cutting her own hair shorter and shorter, hoping to make herself less appealing. She read about Emma's straight-A grades slipping to C's and D's, about her quitting the art club she'd loved since middle school, about the guidance counselor, Mrs. Janet Torres, who'd called twice requesting parent conferences that Mark had somehow managed to reschedule indefinitely. "Today he brought me flowers," read an entry from just 2 weeks ago. "Red roses, like the ones he brings Mom on their anniversary. He put them on my desk and said they were for being his special girl. I threw them away when he left, but I could still smell them all night. Sweet and sickening, like everything else about this house." The roses. Sarah remembered Mark bringing home flowers recently. Remembered thinking it was sweet that he'd gotten some for Emma too. Father-daughter bonding. He'd called it with that warm smile that had once made her feel so lucky to have married such a devoted family man. Creating these detailed family stories requires extensive research and careful storytelling. If this story is keeping you engaged, please like this video and share it with others who appreciate compelling narratives. The photo showed him at last year's firm Christmas party, handsome in his navy suit, arm around Sarah's waist, both of them laughing at something their colleague had said. Looking at it now felt like staring at a stranger. "Hey, beautiful," his text read, "running late tonight, that Peterson case is kicking my ass. Can you handle dinner? Maybe Chinese takeout? Emma loves that sesame chicken from Golden Dragon." The casual mention of their daughter, their missing daughter, made Sarah's stomach lurch. Did he know she was gone? Had he heard her leave, listened to her gather her things in the dark, and done nothing to stop her because her absence would eliminate the evidence of his crimes? Or was he truly unaware, going through the motions of normal life while their daughter wandered the streets, 15 years old and alone, carrying trauma that would mark her forever? Sarah looked around Emma's room with new eyes, seeing details that suddenly held terrible significance. The chair wedged against the door. Had Emma been barricading herself in? The thick curtains that blocked any view from the hallway. Had she been trying to create barriers, some illusion of safety? The stack of library books about runaways, about teens aging out of foster care, about survival skills that no 15-year-old should need to know. Emma had been planning her escape for months, and Sarah had been too busy, too trusting, too medicated to notice. The last entry in the diary was dated yesterday. "I can't do this anymore. Every night I think about dying, about jumping off the highway overpass, or taking all of Mom's pills at once. But then I think, maybe there's another way. Maybe if I disappear, he'll have to stop. Maybe Mom will be safer without me here to cause problems. I don't want to hurt her, but I can't save her and myself at the same time. I have to choose me. Just this once. I have to choose me." Thunder crashed overhead, and Sarah clutched the diary to her chest, Emma's words burning into her heart. Her daughter hadn't run away to hurt them, or to rebel against rules, or to chase some teenage fantasy. She'd run to save her own life, to escape a hell that Sarah had unknowingly helped create by working too much, sleeping too deeply, trusting too completely. But where was Emma now? And how long did they have before something terrible happened to a 15-year-old girl alone on the streets with no money, no family, no one to turn to for help? Sarah's phone rang, and Mark's name appeared again. She stared at it, her finger hovering over the answer button, and realized she had no idea what to say to the man she'd shared a bed with for 16 years. The man who'd walked her down the aisle when her father couldn't. The man who'd held her hand during Emma's difficult birth, and whispered promises about being the best father their daughter could ever have. How do you confront a monster who looks like the person you've loved most in the world? The rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the growing darkness, Emma was out there alone, carrying secrets that had driven her from the only home she'd ever known. Sarah closed the diary and made a decision that would change everything that came after. She wasn't going to answer Mark's call. Not yet. Not until she figured out how to save her daughter and herself from the wreckage of a life built on lies she'd been too naive to see. The purple diary sat heavy in her hands like evidence of her own failure, but also like the first clue in a search that would consume everything she had left to give. Because Emma was out there somewhere, and Sarah would tear the world apart to bring her home safely, to give her the protection that should have been hers from the very beginning. Sarah Chen had always prided herself on being methodical, on seeing patterns where others saw chaos. It was what made her a successful corporate attorney, what had earned her the partnership track at Morrison, Kessler & Associates, what had allowed her to provide the stable, comfortable life she'd never had growing up in her grandmother's cramped apartment above the dry cleaner in Chinatown. But now, sitting in Emma's bedroom as darkness fell like a curtain around their suburban home, she realized that her greatest strength had become her greatest weakness. She'd been so focused on building their future that she'd missed the destruction happening in their present. The diary lay open on Emma's desk, and Sarah forced herself to continue reading, each page revealing new layers of betrayal that made her question every memory, every moment of happiness she'd thought they'd shared as a family. Emma's handwriting grew shakier as the entries progressed, the careful script of a straight-A student dissolving into desperate scratches that spoke of sleepless nights and borrowed time. March 3rd. Dad made pancakes this morning, the kind with chocolate chips that he knows I love. He was humming while he cooked that song Mom likes, The Way You Look Tonight. She was getting ready for work upstairs, and I could hear her heels on the bathroom tile. Everything looked so normal, so perfect, like a commercial for happy families. But his hand kept brushing against mine when he handed me the syrup, and he kept smiling that smile that makes my skin crawl. I couldn't eat. I told him I felt sick, and he said, "That's okay, sweetheart. Daddy will take care of you." The way he said, "take care," made me want to run. But where would I go? Sarah remembered that morning. She'd been running late for a deposition, grabbing her coffee and briefcase while Mark handled breakfast duty. She'd kissed them both goodbye, Emma on the top of her head, Mark on the cheek, grateful for his help, for his patience with their moody teenager. She'd noticed Emma looked pale, but had attributed it to an upcoming math test she'd been worried about. Now she understood that Emma's pallor had been fear, not teenage anxiety. The house felt like a museum now, every familiar object transformed into evidence of her blindness. The family portrait on the mantel, taken at Sears just 8 months ago, showed the three of them arranged in careful harmony, Mark's hand on Sarah's shoulder, Emma standing slightly apart, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Sarah had loved that photo, had chosen it for their Christmas cards, had uploaded it to her LinkedIn profile as proof of her work-life balance. Looking at it now, she could see what she'd missed. Emma's rigid posture, the way she leaned away from Mark's other hand, positioned just out of frame but clearly reaching toward her. How many other photos held similar secrets? How many family dinners, school events, lazy Sunday mornings had been performances for her benefit while Emma endured private hell? Sarah's phone buzzed with another text from Mark. "Sarah, everything okay? You didn't answer my call. Emma's not picking up either. Should I grab dinner for 3, or is she eating at a friend's?" The casual tone, the domestic concern, the way he asked about Emma as if she were simply out living a normal teenage life. It all felt like gaslighting now, like evidence of his ability to compartmentalize, to separate his daytime role as loving father from whatever he became in the dark hours after Sarah fell asleep. She thought about the sleeping pills Dr. Richardson had prescribed 6 months ago, when her work stress began manifesting as insomnia. "Just temporary," he'd assured her. "Something to help reset your sleep cycle." Mark had been supportive, bringing her the pills with a glass of water each night, making sure she took them consistently. "You need your rest," he'd said. "You work too hard. Let me handle the nighttime routine with Emma." The memory made her physically ill. Had her medication been enabling his access to Emma? Had he encouraged her pharmaceutical dependence as a way to ensure his privacy, his opportunities? The thought was so twisted, so calculating, that she almost couldn't accept it. This was Mark, who brought her coffee in bed every morning, who remembered her mother's birthday, who cried at Emma's elementary school plays. But predators weren't monsters in fairy tales. They were coaches and teachers and neighbors and fathers. They were people trusted with care, who twisted that trust into something unspeakable. Sarah walked through their bedroom, seeing it with new eyes. The California king bed where she'd slept so soundly while Emma suffered 3 doors down. The family photos on Mark's nightstand, including one of just him and Emma at a father-daughter dance when she was 12, both of them smiling, Emma in a pink dress, Mark in his best suit, his hand appropriately placed on her shoulder, nothing visible to suggest the horror that was apparently already beginning. 12. Emma had written that it started when she was 13, but Sarah wondered now if the touching, the inappropriate attention, the grooming had begun earlier. How long had Mark been planning this? How long had he been conditioning Emma to accept his attention as normal, as love, as their special secret? The master bathroom held more evidence of her willful blindness. Emma's toothbrush hadn't been in the holder for weeks. Sarah had assumed she was keeping it in her own bathroom now, asserting teenage independence. But what if she'd moved it to avoid coming into the space she shared with Mark? What if every small change in Emma's routine had been an attempt to create distance, to find safety in their own home? Sarah's reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a woman she'd barely recognized. At 41, she'd maintained her professional appearance through discipline and good genetics. Sleek black hair in a bob that grazed her shoulders, minimal makeup that emphasized her dark eyes, tailored clothes that commanded respect in conference rooms. But now she looked haunted, her skin pale except for the flush of anger and shame burning across her cheekbones. She'd been so proud of her life, of their life. The suburban home with its perfect landscaping, the 2-car garage, the granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The family vacations to places she'd only dreamed of as a child. Disney World, the Grand Canyon, that trip to Europe last summer where Emma had seemed so quiet, so withdrawn, spending most of her time with headphones on, lost in music that Sarah assumed was typical teenage escapism. Now she wondered if Emma had been trying to drown out the voices in her head, the memories, the fear of returning home to a routine of violation. The diary revealed more than just the specifics of Mark's abuse. It showed Emma's intelligence, her desperate attempts to understand and cope with something no child should have to endure. She'd researched legal definitions of sexual abuse online, had read about other survivors, had even called a crisis hotline once but hung up when they asked for details. "I don't know what to call it," she'd written. "It's not rape, not like what they talk about in health class. He doesn't hurt me, not physically. He just touches me, and he makes me touch him, and he says it's because I'm beautiful, because I'm special, because this is how fathers show love to their daughters when they're mature enough to understand. But it doesn't feel like love, it feels like drowning." Sarah had to put the diary down and grip the edge of Emma's desk until her knuckles went white. The clinical precision of Mark's manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. He'd convinced Emma that his abuse was normal, was love, was something she should feel grateful for. He'd isolated her from potential support systems, made her complicit in the secrecy, and used Sarah's own absence and medication against them both. The entries showed Emma's deteriorating mental health over the past year. Her grades had slipped from A's to C's, then to D's in her favorite subjects. She'd quit the art club that had been her passion since middle school. She'd stopped hanging out with her best friends, Lily and Madison, claiming they were too immature now. She'd lost weight, had started wearing exclusively baggy clothes, had asked to get her hair cut shorter and shorter, until Sarah had finally insisted she stop before she looked like a boy. Now Sarah understood that Emma had been trying to make herself invisible, untouchable, less appealing to the person who was supposed to protect her most. Her phone rang and Mark's name appeared on the screen again. This time Sarah answered, her voice surprisingly steady when she said hello. "There you are," Mark said, and his familiar voice, warm, concerned, loving, made her stomach clench. "I was getting worried. Is everything okay at home? You didn't respond to my texts." "Everything's fine," Sarah lied, staring at Emma's empty bed. "Just tired, long day." "Where's Emma?" "I tried calling her cell, but it went straight to voicemail." The ease with which he lied, the genuine concern in his voice, was almost more disturbing than the abuse itself. How could he call looking for Emma when he had to know she was gone? Unless he truly didn't know, unless Emma had escaped so quietly, so carefully, that even her abuser hadn't noticed her disappearance. "She's at Madison's house," Sarah said, the lie coming easier than expected, "working on a project." "That's great," Mark said, and Sarah could hear the smile in his voice. "I'm glad she's reconnecting with her friends. I was worried about how isolated she seemed lately." The irony was so sharp it cut. Mark expressed concern about Emma's isolation when he was the architect of it, when every aspect of Emma's withdrawal had been designed to cope with his violation of her trust, her body, her sense of safety in the world. "I'll be home by 8, Mark continued. "Should I pick up that Chinese food? Golden Dragon?" "Sure," Sarah said, though the thought of food made her nauseous. "That sounds good." "Love you, beautiful. See you soon." The endearment that had once made her feel cherished now felt like contamination. How many times had he said those same words to Emma? How many terms of affection had he corrupted, twisted from expressions of love into tools of manipulation and control? After hanging up, Sarah returned to the diary, forcing herself to read every entry, to understand the full scope of what had been happening under her roof, under her nose, while she slept peacefully 3 rooms away. The details were devastating but necessary. She needed to know everything if she was going to save Emma, if she was going to find her daughter and bring her home to safety. But first, she had to figure out how to confront the man who had destroyed their daughter's childhood while wearing the mask of devoted fatherhood. She had to decide whether to call the police immediately or to find Emma first, to make sure she was safe before the legal system took over and everything became public, permanent, part of a record that Emma would carry forever. The rain continued to fall outside Emma's window, and somewhere in that darkness, her 15-year-old daughter was alone, carrying trauma that would mark her for life, believing that running away was her only option for survival. Sarah closed the diary and made another decision. She was going to find Emma tonight, before Mark came home, before she had to look into his eyes and pretend everything was normal. She was going to search every place a frightened teenager might go, and she wasn't going to stop until her daughter was safe in her arms, protected by a mother who had finally opened her eyes to see the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. Sarah grabbed her car keys and Emma's diary, her mind racing through every place her daughter might seek refuge. The rain had intensified, turning their quiet suburban streets into rivers of reflected streetlight, and each drop against her windshield felt like time slipping away. Emma had been gone for over 14 hours now, and the darkness held dangers that made Sarah's throat close with panic. She drove first to Madison Torres's house on Elm Street, the brick colonial where Emma had spent countless sleepovers in happier times. Sarah sat in her car for several minutes, watching the warm light spill from the living room windows, seeing the normal family evening unfolding inside. Madison doing homework at the kitchen table while her mother, Rosa, cleaned up from dinner. The normalcy of it all made Sarah's chest ache with loss for everything they'd never have again. When Rosa answered the door, her expression immediately shifted from surprise to concern. "Sarah, what's wrong? You look terrible." "Is Emma here?" Sarah asked, though she could already see the answer in Rosa's eyes. "No, honey, I haven't seen Emma in months. Not since." Rosa paused, her brow furrowing. "Not since last spring, I think. Madison's been worried about her." She said Emma stopped returning her texts, stopped wanting to hang out. "We thought maybe you'd had a falling out." The confirmation of Emma's isolation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Rosa Torres had been her friend for 6 years, ever since their daughters had bonded in 4th grade over a shared love of art and terrible jokes. They'd shared carpools, birthday parties, Countless conversations about the challenges of raising daughters in an increasingly complicated world. But Sarah had been so consumed with work, so trusting of Mark's involvement in Emma's social life, that she hadn't noticed when her daughter's friendship simply disappeared. "If you see her," Sarah managed, "please call me immediately, day or night." Rosa stepped onto her porch despite the rain, lowering her voice. "Sarah, what's happening? Should I call someone? Are you in danger?" The genuine concern in Rosa's eyes almost broke Sarah's composure. Here was someone who would help, who would understand, who wouldn't judge or demand explanations she wasn't ready to give. But Emma was still missing, and every minute of conversation was another minute her daughter spent alone and vulnerable. "I just need to find Emma," Sarah said. "If she shows up here, please don't let her leave, and don't call Mark." Rosa's eyes widened, but she nodded. "Of course, whatever you need." Sarah's next stop was the Riverside Mall, where teenagers often congregated, especially when they needed somewhere warm and public to wait out difficult situations. She parked near the food court and walked through the fluorescent-lit corridors, scanning faces, checking the bathroom, approaching security guards with Emma's school photo. Most of them were helpful but hadn't seen her. One older guard, a woman with kind eyes and gray hair, took the photo more seriously. "Pretty girl," she said. "Looks sad though, even in this picture. You can see it in the eyes. How long has she been missing?" "Since early this morning," Sarah replied, though it felt like years. "That's not long, legally speaking," the guard said gently. "But I can see you're scared. Have you called the police?" Sarah hesitated. Once she involved law enforcement, everything would accelerate beyond her control. Emma's situation would become a case file. Mark would be questioned. Their private nightmare would become public record. And what if they found Emma but couldn't protect her? What if the system failed them, as it failed so many others? "Not yet," Sarah said. "I'm hoping to find her first, bring her home safe." The guard's expression softened with understanding. "Check the 24-hour places," she suggested. "Denny's, McDonald's, anywhere a kid might be able to sit for hours without anyone bothering them. And the library downtown stays open until 10 on weekdays." The public library. Sarah's heart jumped with hope. Emma had always loved books, had spent countless hours in quiet corners reading about worlds far away from her own. It would be exactly the kind of place she'd choose. Safe, warm, public enough to avoid danger, but anonymous enough to avoid detection. Sarah drove downtown through streets slick with rain, past the courthouse where she'd won her first major case, past the coffee shop where she and Mark used to meet for lunch in the early days of their marriage when everything seemed possible and uncomplicated. The library's parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars belonging to evening patrons and staff. Inside, the familiar smell of books and coffee from the small cafe hit her like a memory from Emma's childhood. All those Saturday afternoons they'd spent here together, Emma curled in the children's section, while Sarah worked on case files at a nearby table, both of them content in the shared silence of a place dedicated to learning and imagination. Sarah walked through the stacks systematically, checking every reading nook, every computer terminal, every quiet corner where a 15-year-old girl might try to disappear. The librarian at the circulation desk, a young man with multiple piercings and purple hair, was initially reluctant to help, until Sarah showed him Emma's photo and explained she was missing. "I saw her," he said immediately, "earlier today, maybe around 2 o'clock. She was in the teen section, but not reading, just sitting. She looked like she'd been crying." Sarah's knees nearly gave out with relief. "Is she still here?" "No, she left maybe an hour ago. Asked me about the bus schedule downtown. I gave her one of the route maps we keep at the desk." Downtown. The bus routes from downtown connected to everywhere. The university, the airport, other cities entirely. Emma could be anywhere by now, could be getting farther away with each passing minute. "Did she say where she was going?" The librarian shook his head. "She seemed really scared, though. I asked if she was okay, if she needed me to call someone, but she said no and left pretty quickly after that." Sarah thanked him and sat in her car in the library parking lot, rain drumming on the roof while she tried to think like Emma, to imagine where a frightened 15-year-old would go with limited money and no family to turn to. Emma was smart, resourceful, but she was also traumatized and alone. She needed shelter, food, safety, But she also needed to avoid places where adults would ask questions or demand identification. Her phone rang, and Mark's name appeared on the screen. Sarah stared at it, her finger hovering over the answer button, and felt a rage so pure it surprised her with its intensity. This man, who had violated their daughter's trust and body, was calling to check on dinner plans while Emma wandered the streets in the rain. She answered on the fourth ring. "Sarah, where are you? I'm home, and there's no sign of dinner." Emma's not answering her phone, and Madison's mom said she's not there. The lie came easily now. "I'm at the office. Had an emergency with the Morrison case. Emma texted me that she was going to study at the library." "This late? It's almost 9 o'clock. "You know how she gets when she's focused?" Sarah said, proud of how normal her voice sounded. "I'll pick up something on the way home. Chinese, okay?" "Of course. Drive safe in this rain. Love you." After hanging up, Sarah sat in the parking lot and called Emma's phone directly, knowing it would go to voicemail but needing to try. When the familiar message began, "Hi, you've reached Emma. I'm probably busy being awesome, so leave a message and I'll get back to you," Sarah's composure finally cracked. "Emma, baby, it's Mom," she said after the beep, her voice breaking. "I found your diary and I know what Dad did to you. I know why you left and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see it, didn't protect you. Please come home. Please call me. We're gonna fix this, I promise. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I believe you, and I'm going to make sure you're safe." She ended the call and immediately called again, leaving another message. "Emma, you don't have to face this alone anymore. I'm looking for you right now, and I won't stop until I find you. Whatever you need, whatever it takes to make you feel safe, we'll figure it out together. Please just let me know you're okay." The downtown area at night was a different world from the suburban safety of their neighborhood. Sarah drove slowly through streets lined with pawn shops, bail bond offices, and 24-hour diners, checking every lit window for a glimpse of Emma's face. She stopped at a McDonald's and showed Emma's picture to the night manager, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, who studied the photo with the attention of someone who'd seen too many missing kids. "She was here," the manager said, "maybe 3 hours ago. Ordered just a small coffee and sat in the back booth for a long time. Real quiet, kept looking out the window like she was watching for someone. My crew was worried about her, but she left before we could ask if she needed help. 3 hours ago." Sarah's heart raced. Emma had been so close, had been sitting in this very restaurant while Sarah was still at home reading the diary, still trying to process the magnitude of Mark's betrayal. "Did you see which direction she went when she left?" "Toward the bus station, I think. There's a Greyhound terminal 2 blocks down." The bus station. Sarah's blood ran cold. Emma could already be on a bus to anywhere, could be hundreds of miles away by now, a 15-year-old girl alone on the highways with no protection and no one to turn to for help. Sarah drove to the Greyhound station and parked illegally in front of the building, not caring about tickets or towing. Inside, the waiting area was occupied by a handful of travelers. An elderly man reading a newspaper, a young mother with 2 small children, several people who looked like they were between homes or jobs or lives. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on cracked linoleum floors. The ticket agent, a middle-aged black woman with intelligent eyes and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything the night shift had to offer, looked at Emma's photo with immediate recognition. "Baby girl with the sad eyes," she said. "Yeah, she was here, asked about buses to Chicago, said she had family there." Sarah's heart stopped. "Did she buy a ticket?" "No. When I told her the price, she just thanked me and left. Didn't have enough money, I'd guess. But she asked about the schedule, when the next bus would leave." "When was that?" "The Chicago bus? Left about 40 minutes ago." Sarah felt the world tilt. If Emma had somehow gotten money, if someone had helped her, or if she'd found another way, she could be on that bus right now, traveling through the night toward a city where she knew no one, where she could disappear completely into the anonymous millions. But the ticket agent was still talking. "But honey, I don't think she got on it. I saw her outside afterward, sitting on the bench by the phone booth. She looked like she was trying to decide something, you know? Like maybe she wasn't as sure about leaving as she wanted to be." Hope flickered back to life in Sarah's chest. "How long ago did you see her?" Maybe an hour? Hour and a half? She might still be nearby. There's not much around here that's safe for a young girl at night. But there's a 24-hour laundromat 3 blocks north, and sometimes kids go there when they need somewhere warm to wait. Sarah thanked the woman and ran back to her car, driving the 3 blocks to the laundromat in what felt like the longest minutes of her life. The building was bright and warm, filled with the mechanical rhythm of washing machines and the smell of detergent and fabric softener. Only a few machines were running, their owners probably at home sleeping while their clothes cleaned. And there, in the back corner, sitting on a plastic chair beside a row of dryers, was Emma. Sarah's daughter looked smaller than her 15 years, hunched inside an oversized hoodie that Sarah recognized as one she'd outgrown months ago, her dark hair lank with rain, her face pale and exhausted. She had a small backpack at her feet and was staring at nothing, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Sarah approached slowly, not wanting to startle her, not wanting to do anything that might make Emma run again. When Emma looked up and saw her, her expression cycled through surprise, fear, and something that might have been relief. "Mom?" Emma's voice was smaller than it had been since she was 7 years old. "Oh, baby," Sarah said, and then Emma was in her arms, both of them crying, holding each other so tightly that Sarah could feel her daughter's ribs through the thin hoodie, could feel how much weight she'd lost, how fragile she'd become under the burden of secrets too heavy for anyone to carry alone. "I'm sorry," Emma sobbed against Sarah's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know what else to do." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Sarah said fiercely. "Nothing. Do you understand me? You are not responsible for any of this." Emma pulled back slightly, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "But I should have told you sooner. I should have found a way to make you believe me." "I should have seen it," Sarah said, cupping Emma's face in her hands. "I should have protected you. That was my job, and I failed you. But we're gonna fix this now, okay? We're gonna make sure you're safe." They sat together in the laundromat, while Sarah called in sick to work for the next day, while she texted Mark that Emma was spending the night at a friend's house, and she was staying late at the office to finish a case. The lies felt necessary now, buying them time to figure out their next move without Mark becoming suspicious. Emma told her about the past 14 hours, how she'd walked for miles in the rain, how she'd spent her birthday money from her grandmother on a bus ticket she couldn't bring herself to use, how she'd been sitting in the laundromat trying to decide whether to go back home or disappear forever. "I kept thinking about you," Emma said, "about how you'd feel when you found out I was gone. But I also kept thinking that maybe you'd be better off without me there to cause problems." The words cut through Sarah like broken glass. Her daughter, brilliant, creative, kind Emma, had been convinced that her absence would improve their family, that she was the problem rather than the victim. "Emma, listen to me," Sarah said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, the absolute best thing, and what your father did to you, that's not your fault. It's not something you caused or deserved or could have prevented. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, but Sarah could see the doubt still lingering in her eyes, the damage that months of psychological manipulation had done to her sense of self-worth and reality. They drove home together through the empty streets, Emma curled in the passenger seat like a much younger child, her backpack clutched to her chest like armor. Sarah's mind was racing ahead to the conversation she would have to have with Mark, to the decisions they would need to make about police reports and legal proceedings, and how to rebuild their lives from the ruins of everything they'd thought they knew. But first, Emma needed safety. She needed to sleep in her own bed, in her own room, protected by a mother who would never again let her guard down, who would never again trust blindly or sleep too deeply to hear danger approaching. The house was dark when they arrived, Mark's car in the garage, the windows black except for the porch light he'd left burning. Sarah felt her stomach clench as she turned off the engine, knowing that somewhere inside that familiar structure, the man who had destroyed their daughter's innocence was sleeping peacefully, probably dreaming normal dreams, probably planning to wake up tomorrow and continue the charade of devoted fatherhood. "Is he here?" Emma asked, her voice tight with fear. "Yes, but he's asleep. And Emma, I promise you, he will never hurt you again. Never." They entered through the front door, Sarah first, Emma close behind her, both of them moving quietly through the darkened hallways. The house felt different now, charged with new knowledge, every shadow potentially hiding fresh horrors. Sarah walked Emma to her room and helped her change into clean pajamas, noting how her daughter automatically locked the door behind them, how she glanced repeatedly at the window as if planning escape routes. "I'm going to sleep on your floor tonight," Sarah said, "right here beside your bed. And tomorrow, we're going to figure out how to make sure you never have to be afraid in your own home again." "What about Dad?" Emma whispered. "Let me worry about Dad, you just worry about getting some sleep, okay? You're safe now, I promise." Sarah made a bed on Emma's floor with extra blankets and pillows, and lay there listening to her daughter's breathing gradually slow and deepen into something approaching natural sleep. Through the thin walls, she could hear Mark's familiar snoring from their bedroom down the hall, the same sound that had been the soundtrack to their marriage for 16 years. How many nights had Emma lain awake listening to those same sounds, knowing they meant her abuser was asleep and she was temporarily safe? How many mornings had she woken up hoping it had all been a nightmare, only to face another day of careful performance and secret terror? As Emma finally fell asleep, Sarah lay staring at the ceiling and planning. She would call her friend Janet Morrison, the senior partner at her firm who had daughters of her own, who would understand the legal implications and could recommend the right kind of attorney. She would contact Dr. Patricia Weinstein, Emma's pediatrician, who could document any physical evidence and connect them with trauma counselors. She would research domestic violence resources, safe houses if necessary, legal procedures for obtaining restraining orders. But first, she would have to confront Mark. She would have to look into the eyes of the man she'd loved and trusted for 16 years and tell him that she knew what he'd done, that Emma was safe now, that their life as they'd known it was over. The thought terrified her almost as much as it empowered her. Because Sarah Chen, who had built a successful legal career on her ability to see patterns and construct arguments from evidence, finally had all the evidence she needed to destroy the man who had destroyed their daughter's childhood. And she was going to use every skill she'd learned, every contact she'd made, every ounce of strength she possessed to make sure Emma never had to be afraid again. Sarah woke at dawn with a crick in her neck from sleeping on Emma's floor, but her daughter was still asleep, her face peaceful for the first time in months. The morning light filtering through the gauze curtains revealed details Sarah had missed in the darkness. How thin Emma had gotten, how her fingernails were bitten down to nothing, how even in sleep her body remained tense, ready for flight. The house was quiet, but Sarah could smell coffee brewing downstairs, could hear Mark moving around the kitchen with his usual morning efficiency. The normalcy of it made her stomach turn. How could he go through the motions of ordinary domestic life? Making coffee, probably planning to cook breakfast, maybe humming that song he loved while he read the morning news, when their daughter had spent the night on the streets because of his crimes. Sarah wrote a note for Emma. "Gone downstairs to talk to Dad. Stay in your room, lock the door, I love you." She slipped it onto Emma's nightstand and quietly left the room, her heart hammering as she descended the stairs toward what felt like the most important conversation of her life. Mark was standing at the kitchen counter in his navy robe, reading something on his tablet while his coffee cooled beside him. He looked up when she entered, his face brightening with the smile that had once made her feel so loved, so chosen. "There you are," he said warmly. "I was starting to worry you never came home last night." The lie came so easily to him, Sarah realized. He'd probably practiced this exact conversation, had probably planned how to express concern about her absence while deflecting attention from Emma's disappearance. Unless he truly didn't know Emma had been gone, unless his compartmentalization was so complete that he could abuse their daughter while genuinely believing himself to be a devoted father. "We need to talk," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Of course. Coffee first? You look exhausted." The casual offer of hospitality from the man who had violated their daughter felt obscene. Sarah shook her head and remained standing while Mark settled onto his usual bar stool, tablet forgotten, attention focused entirely on her with the intensity he brought to everything he cared about. "I found Emma's diary yesterday," Sarah said. Mark's expression didn't change, but Sarah caught something, a flicker of wariness maybe, or calculation. "Oh? I hope she's not writing terrible things about us. Teenagers can be so dramatic about normal family rules." The dismissive tone, the way he immediately minimized Emma's voice, told Sarah everything she needed to know about his strategy. He would deny, deflect, gaslight. He would make Emma seem unreliable, emotional, prone to exaggeration. He would use Sarah's own guilt and love against her. She wrote about what you did to her, Mark. What you've been doing to her. Now his face changed, but subtly. The smile faded, replaced by an expression of concerned confusion that looked so genuine Sarah almost doubted herself for a moment. Sarah, what are you talking about? What did Emma write that has you so upset? She wrote about you coming into her room at night, about you touching her, about how you told her it was normal, that it was love, that I would choose you over her if she ever told me. Mark was quiet for a long moment, his coffee growing cold between his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, hurt, tinged with the kind of wounded innocence that Sarah had seen him use in court when a judge questioned his arguments. Honey, Emma's been struggling lately, you know that. Her grades, her mood, the way she's isolated herself from her friends. I've been worried about her mental health, about whether she might be creating stories to explain feelings she doesn't understand. The clinical precision of his response made Sarah's skin crawl. He'd been prepared for this conversation, had probably rehearsed variations of it in case Emma ever found the courage to speak. Every word was chosen to plant doubt, to suggest that their traumatized daughter was delusional rather than truthful. She's not making it up, Mark. I know you want to believe her, she's our daughter, and of course we should take her concerns seriously. But Sarah, think about this rationally. When would I have had the opportunity to do what she's describing? You're here every night. Emma's room is right down the hall from ours. Don't you think you would have noticed something? The question hit its target perfectly, because Sarah had been asking herself the same thing. How had she missed it? How had she slept through Emma's violation, night after night, month after month? You encouraged me to take sleeping medication, Sarah said slowly. You made sure I took it every night. Mark's eyebrows rose in an expression of such genuine surprise that for a moment, Sarah wondered if she was losing her mind, if she was constructing conspiracy theories from coincidence and circumstance. Sarah, you were having panic attacks. You couldn't sleep. Your work was suffering. Your health was suffering. I was worried about you. Are you seriously suggesting that I encouraged you to take doctor-prescribed medication so I could abuse our daughter? The way he said it, with such reasonable incredulity, such obvious pain at being accused, made Sarah doubt her own perceptions. This was Mark, who had held her hand through her mother's funeral, who had stayed up all night with Emma when she had pneumonia at age 7, who cried at movies and remembered anniversaries and brought her flowers for no reason other than love. But then she thought about Emma in the laundromat, small and broken, and convinced that her disappearance would improve their family. She thought about the diary entries, the careful documentation of months of abuse, the desperate attempts to find help and safety within a system designed to protect the very person who was hurting her. I believe Emma, Sarah said firmly. Mark's face crumpled with what looked like genuine anguish. Sarah, please. I know you're upset, but accusing me of something like this, do you understand what this could do to our family? To my career? To Emma herself if she has to go through interrogations and medical exams and court proceedings based on what might be false memories or teenage fantasies? The manipulation was so skilled, so layered, that Sarah felt momentarily dizzy. He was using her love for Emma against her, suggesting that protecting Emma from further trauma required ignoring her current trauma. He was positioning himself as the rational adult who understood the consequences while she was the emotional mother being led astray by a disturbed teenager. Where is Emma now? Mark asked. Is she upstairs? I think we should all sit down together and talk about this as a family. Maybe she needs professional help to work through whatever's causing these confusions. She's not confused, Mark. She's traumatized. By what? By normal parental affection that she's misinterpreting? Sarah, I've never hurt Emma. I love her more than my own life. You know that. The sincerity in his voice was devastating because Sarah could see that in some twisted way he might actually believe it. He might have convinced himself that his abuse was love, that his violation of Emma's boundaries was affection, that her trauma was simply misunderstanding rather than appropriate response to harm. "I've talked to other people," Sarah said, though it wasn't entirely true yet. "Emma's teachers have noticed changes in her behavior. Her doctor has concerns." "This isn't just a teenage phase, Mark." For the first time, Mark's composure cracked slightly. Sarah saw a flash of something, fear, maybe, or calculation, cross his features before he regained control. "What people? What did you tell them?" The question revealed more than he probably intended. If he were truly innocent, his concern would be for Emma's well-being, not for who knew about the accusations. An innocent person would want every resource mobilized to help their daughter work through her confusion. A guilty person would worry about exposure, about the circle of knowledge expanding beyond his control. "People who care about Emma's safety," Sarah said. "Sarah, please, think about what you're doing here. If you make accusations like this public, there's no taking them back. Even if Emma eventually realizes she's been mistaken, the damage will be permanent. My reputation, my career, our family's standing in the community, all of it will be destroyed based on the confused memories of a troubled teenager." The threat was subtle but clear. Accusing him would cost them everything, would destroy not just his life but theirs as well. He was reminding her that she benefited from his success, that Emma's college fund and their comfortable lifestyle depended on his career remaining intact. "And what about Emma's life?" Sarah asked. "What about the damage to her?" "There is no damage to her," Mark said, his voice rising slightly for the first time. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. Whatever she thinks happened, whatever she's convinced herself is true, I have never, ever hurt our daughter. I would die before I'd hurt her." The passion in his voice might have convinced her once. The tears gathering in his eyes, the way his hands shook as he reached for his coffee cup, the obvious pain at being accused by the woman he loved. It all looked so real, so genuine, so much like the response an innocent man would have to a devastating false accusation. But Sarah remembered Emma's words. "He's never hurt me, not really, just touching, just our secret, but it feels like dying every time." Mark had convinced Emma that what he was doing wasn't real abuse, wasn't real harm. He'd probably convinced himself of the same thing, had created a mental framework where his actions were justified, loving, normal. The ability to rationalize evil was perhaps more frightening than the evil itself. "I'm taking Emma to stay with my sister," Sarah said. "We're leaving this morning." Mark's face went pale. "Sarah, you can't. If you take Emma away based on these accusations, if you involve your family in this delusion, you'll be destroying our marriage, our family, everything we've built together." "You already destroyed it, Mark. The day you first touched our daughter inappropriately, you destroyed everything." "I never touched her inappropriately." The words came out as a shout, and Mark immediately seemed to realize his loss of control. He took a deep breath, visibly composing himself. "Sarah, I'm begging you, don't do this to us. Don't do this to Emma. Get her some counseling, get us some family therapy, but don't tear apart our family based on fantasies that might be symptoms of a mental health crisis she's experiencing." The clinical language, the way he pathologized Emma's truth-telling, made Sarah feel sick. But it also made her more certain than ever that she was seeing him clearly for the first time in their 16-year marriage. "Goodbye, Mark," Sarah said, turning toward the stairs. "Sarah, wait, please, I love you, I love Emma. Whatever problems we're having as a family, we can work through them together. Don't make any decisions while you're emotional that you'll regret when you've had time to think rationally." Sarah paused at the bottom of the staircase, looking back at the man who had shared her bed, her dreams, her daughter's innocence. He looked smaller now, older, his face drawn with what might have been grief or might have been fear of consequences finally arriving. "The only thing I regret," Sarah said, "is not seeing the truth sooner." Upstairs, Emma was awake, sitting on her bed with her knees drawn to her chest, listening to the raised voices from the kitchen with an expression of familiar terror. "Is he angry?" Emma whispered. "He's scared," Sarah said. "Because he knows I believe you now, and he knows his secret is out." "Did he admit it?" Sarah sat beside Emma on the bed, choosing her words carefully. "He denied it, but in a way that made it clear he was lying. Honey, we need to pack some things and leave this house. We need to go somewhere safe where we can figure out what to do next." Emma nodded, but her face was etched with worry. "Mom, what if no one else believes me? What if the police don't believe me, or if there's no proof, or if—" "Emma, stop." Sarah took her daughter's hands, noting how cold they were despite the warm morning. "I believe you. That's enough to start with. We're going to find people who specialize in helping families like ours, people who understand what you've been through. And we're going to make sure you're safe and protected while we figure out the legal stuff." They packed quickly and quietly, Sarah throwing clothes and essentials into suitcases, while Emma gathered her art supplies and the few possessions that felt truly hers. From downstairs came the sounds of Mark on the phone, his voice low and urgent, though Sarah couldn't make out the words. Probably calling his lawyer or his brother, or someone who could help him strategize his defense against the truth that was finally coming to light. As they loaded the car, Mark appeared in the garage doorway, still in his robe, his face a mask of wounded confusion that might have fooled anyone who didn't know what lay beneath it. "Emma, sweetheart," he said, his voice gentle and concerned. "Mom told me you've been having some confusing thoughts about our relationship. I want you to know that I love you, and if something I did made you uncomfortable, I'm sorry. Maybe we misunderstood each other somehow." The manipulation was breathtaking, positioning himself as the caring father willing to apologize for Emma's confusion while simultaneously denying any wrongdoing. Sarah watched Emma's face shut down, watched her daughter retreat into the protective numbness that had probably been her survival mechanism for months. "Get in the car, Emma," Sarah said firmly. "Sarah, please don't do this." Mark tried one more time. "Whatever problems we're having, running away won't solve them. Let's get some professional help, someone who can mediate between Emma's perceptions and the reality of our family dynamics." The phrase "Emma's perceptions versus reality" was the final confirmation Sarah needed. Mark would never admit the truth, would probably never even acknowledge it to himself. He would paint Emma as disturbed, delusional, in need of correction rather than protection. He would use every tool at his disposal: his charm, his professional reputation, his ability to present himself as the rational adult in a crisis, to discredit his victim and preserve his image. Sarah started the car and backed out of the garage while Mark stood watching, his figure growing smaller in the rearview mirror until he disappeared entirely, along with the house where Emma had been born, had taken her first steps, had learned to read, and had had her childhood systematically destroyed by the man who was supposed to protect her most. "Where are we going?" Emma asked as they drove through their neighborhood, past the familiar landmarks of what had been their normal life just 24 hours earlier. "To Aunt Lisa's house," Sarah said, "and then we're going to build you a new life, one where you never have to be afraid again." In the passenger seat, Emma began to cry, not the desperate sobs of the night before, but quieter tears that seemed to carry months of held breath, years of careful performance, a lifetime of secrets finally released into the light. 6 months later, Sarah sat in the waiting room of Dr. Rebecca Martinez's office, watching Emma sketch in the notebook she now carried everywhere. Her daughter's drawings had evolved from the dark, closed doorways of her traumatized period to windows that opened onto landscapes filled with light. Today's sketch showed a tree with deep roots and branches reaching toward a sun that actually had rays extending beyond the page borders. A sign, Dr. Martinez had explained, that Emma was beginning to see possibilities beyond the immediate frame of her experience. The legal proceedings had been brutal but necessary. Mark had hired an expensive attorney who specialized in defending against sexual abuse allegations, a man who had attempted to paint Emma as an unstable teenager seeking attention through false accusations. But Emma's diary, combined with testimony from her teachers about the dramatic changes in her behavior, medical evidence of trauma symptoms, and Sarah's own account of Mark's manipulation tactics, had built a case that even his skilled lawyer couldn't entirely dismantle. The custody hearing had been particularly difficult. Emma had to testify about the abuse in detail, had to face Mark across a courtroom while describing how he'd violated her trust and body. But she'd been strong, her voice steady as she spoke her truth to the judge, her eyes never wavering even when Mark's attorney tried to discredit her testimony. Judge Patricia Hoffman, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many cases like this one, had listened to every word with the attention such testimony deserved. When she delivered her ruling, full custody to Sarah, supervised visitation only for Mark pending the outcome of criminal proceedings, Emma had cried with relief. "The court finds the minor child's testimony to be credible and consistent," Judge Hoffman had said. "The evidence suggests a pattern of sexual abuse that has caused significant psychological harm. This child's safety and well-being must be the paramount concern of any custody arrangement." Mark had been arrested 3 weeks later when the district attorney's office filed charges based on Emma's testimony and the evidence Sarah had provided. The news had made the local papers. Prominent attorney charged with child sexual abuse, and their former neighbors had stared when Sarah returned to pack more belongings from the house that no longer felt like home. But there had been unexpected support as well. Rosa Torres had stopped by with casseroles and offered to testify about Emma's changed behavior if needed. Dr. Patricia Weinstein had provided detailed medical records documenting Emma's symptoms over the past 2 years, symptoms she now recognized as consistent with sexual trauma. Even Father Miguel from St. Catherine's had reached out, explaining that Emma's questions about confession and forgiveness had raised his concerns, though he'd been unsure how to act on them at the time. "I should have pushed harder," he'd told Sarah during a difficult conversation in his office. "When children ask whether God can love someone who feels too dirty to be saved, that's usually a sign of abuse. I failed her by not finding a way to help her speak." The community response had been mixed. Some people rallied around Emma and Sarah, understanding that children don't fabricate detailed accounts of sexual abuse for attention or revenge. Others whispered about family drama, about vindictive ex-wives and confused teenagers, about how such a nice man couldn't possibly have done such terrible things. Mark's colleagues at his law firm had been notably quiet, neither condemning nor supporting him publicly, waiting to see how the legal proceedings would unfold. Sarah had left Morrison, Kessler, and Associates to start her own practice, specializing in family law, with an emphasis on representing survivors of domestic violence and child abuse. The transition had been financially difficult at first, but word spread quickly about the attorney who had successfully protected her own daughter from an abusive father, and her client list grew steadily with people who needed someone who understood the complexities of family trauma. Emma had started at a new school in the district where Lisa lived, a fresh environment where her past wasn't known and she could rebuild her identity as something other than a victim. She'd joined the art club immediately and had made friends with other students who appreciated her quiet intensity and creative talent. Her grades had improved dramatically once she was no longer living in fear, no longer expending all her energy on survival and concealment. Therapy with Dr. Martinez had been crucial to Emma's healing. The psychologist specialized in adolescent trauma and had experience with cases involving parental abuse, understanding the unique challenges faced by children who had been betrayed by someone they were supposed to trust completely. Emma's progress has been remarkable, Dr. Martinez had told Sarah during their last consultation. She's developing healthy coping strategies, learning to set boundaries, and most importantly, she's beginning to trust her own perceptions again. The gaslighting she experienced was severe, but children are resilient when they have consistent support and validation. The financial settlement from the divorce had been substantial. Mark's guilt had led him to agree to terms that favored Emma's future significantly. Sarah had set up a trust fund for Emma's college education and therapy needs, ensuring that the consequences of Mark's actions wouldn't limit their daughter's opportunities for growth and recovery. Emma had asked to change her last name, wanting to distance herself from any connection to Mark. She'd chosen Chen Martinez, honoring both her mother's heritage and Dr. Martinez's role in her healing journey. The legal name change had felt like a rebirth ceremony, Emma signing her new name with careful pride while Sarah watched and remembered the broken girl she'd found in that laundromat just months earlier. The nightmares had gradually diminished, though Emma still sometimes woke, gasping from dreams about locked doors and men with familiar voices calling her name. But she'd learned techniques for grounding herself in reality, for distinguishing between past trauma and present safety, for reaching out for help when the memories became overwhelming. "I'm not the same person I was before," Emma had told Sarah one evening while they cooked dinner together in Lisa's kitchen. "And I'm not the person I was during the bad time either. I'm someone new, someone who knows what happened but doesn't have to be defined by it." The wisdom in her 15-year-old daughter's words had taken Sarah's breath away. Emma was indeed becoming someone new, stronger, more aware, more compassionate toward others who had suffered similar trauma. She'd started volunteering at a crisis center for teens, answering phones and sharing her story with other young survivors who needed to know that healing was possible. Mark's criminal trial was scheduled to begin in 3 months. Emma would have to testify again, would have to face her abuser in a public courtroom while a jury decided whether to convict him of multiple counts of child sexual abuse. The prospect still caused her anxiety, but she was no longer the terrified girl who had run away in the rain. She was a survivor with a support system, with people who believed her, with the knowledge that speaking her truth had already freed her from the prison of secrecy Mark had constructed around her. "I want other kids to know that adults will believe them if they tell the truth," Emma had said when asked if she wanted to proceed with the criminal case. "I want other kids to know they don't have to carry those secrets alone." Sarah had started a scholarship fund in Emma's name for young survivors of family abuse who wanted to pursue higher education. The first recipient would be selected next year, and Emma had insisted on being involved in the selection process, wanting to help other teens who had been forced to grow up too fast under circumstances no child should have to endure. The house they'd fled was still on the market, though Sarah had had it thoroughly cleaned and redecorated before listing it. She couldn't bear the thought of another family moving into spaces that held such terrible memories, without at least attempting to cleanse them of the pain that had soaked into the very walls. Mark was living in a small apartment downtown, his legal practice struggling as former clients quietly took their business elsewhere. "Do you ever miss him?" Emma had asked one day, the question catching Sarah off guard with its complexity. "I miss the person I thought he was," Sarah had answered after careful consideration. "I miss the father I thought you had, the husband I thought I married. But I don't miss the real Mark, the one who hurt you. I'm angry at that Mark, and I'm angry at myself for not seeing him sooner. I miss the dad I thought I had too," Emma had admitted, before it started. "I remember him teaching me to ride my bike, helping with homework, all those normal dad things. It's confusing to have good memories of someone who hurt you so much." Dr. Martinez had helped them both understand that trauma could coexist with love, that abusers weren't typically monsters in every aspect of their lives, that the confusion of mixed feelings was normal and didn't invalidate Emma's experience or Sarah's anger. Healing meant learning to hold complexity, to acknowledge that Mark had been capable of genuine care while simultaneously being capable of profound violation. The support group for non-offending parents that Sarah had joined met every Thursday evening in the basement of a community center across town. Listening to other mothers and fathers who had discovered similar secrets about their partners had been both devastating and healing. Devastating to learn how common such betrayals were, healing to know that she wasn't alone in her guilt, anger, and determination to protect her child. "The hardest part," said Janet, whose ex-husband had abused both their daughters, "is forgiving yourself for not knowing, but predators are skilled at deception. They choose partners who trust them, who work hard, who want to believe in the goodness of family. Our love was used against us, but that doesn't make the love wrong." Sarah had learned to separate her responsibility as a parent from her responsibility for Mark's crimes. She was responsible for creating safety for Emma going forward, for believing her daughter's truth, for ensuring that justice was pursued. She was not responsible for Mark's choices, for his ability to compartmentalize his roles as husband and abuser, for the sophisticated manipulation that had kept his secret for so long. Emma's art had become a powerful tool for processing her experience. She was working on a series of paintings about doorways, some closed and locked, others open to light, still others in the process of being opened by figures who looked remarkably like teenage girls with determined expressions. Her art teacher at the new school had encouraged her to submit several pieces to a regional competition for young artists addressing social issues. "Art saved me," Emma had told the reporter who interviewed her when one of her paintings won first place in the trauma recovery category. "When I couldn't find words for what was happening to me, I could put it on paper. And when I started healing, I could paint that too. Art makes the invisible visible." The painting that had won was called Opening Doors and showed a girl standing in a hallway lined with doors of different colors and sizes. Some doors were chained shut with heavy locks, others were slightly ajar with light streaming through, and the door directly in front of the girl was wide open, revealing a landscape filled with other young people, other survivors, walking together toward a horizon that stretched beyond the borders of the canvas. Sarah had cried when she first saw it, recognizing not just Emma's healing journey but her own as well. They had both been trapped behind locked doors of ignorance and secrecy, and they were both learning to walk through doorways that led to truth, justice, and the possibility of building something better from the ruins of what they'd lost. 3 years later, Emma sat in the witness preparation room at the courthouse, her hands steady as she reviewed her testimony notes one final time. At 18, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that spoke of hard-won wisdom and carefully cultivated strength. Her dark hair was longer now, framing a face that had grown into its features, and her eyes held the depth of someone who had stared into darkness and chosen to walk toward light. Today was the final day of Mark's appeal hearing. He had been convicted 2 years ago on multiple counts of child sexual abuse and sentenced to 8 years in prison. But his legal team had challenged the conviction on technical grounds, claiming that Emma's testimony had been coached and that the evidence was circumstantial. The appellate court's decision would determine whether he remained incarcerated or was granted a new trial. Sarah sat beside Emma, her own hands clasped tightly in her lap. At 44, she had grown into her role as both mother and advocate, her successful family law practice having helped dozens of families navigate similar crises. She wore a navy suit that projected professional confidence, but Emma could see the protective, fierce love in her mother's eyes, the look of a woman who would move mountains to keep her daughter safe. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked gently. Emma nodded. "I've been ready for 3 years. Today we finish what we started." The courtroom was packed with supporters. Rosa Torres and her daughter Madison, Dr. Martinez, Father Miguel, several of Emma's teachers from her new school, and members of the survivor support group that Emma had helped establish at the community center. Mark sat at the defendant's table with his attorney, looking older and smaller than Emma remembered, his once commanding presence diminished by years of legal battles and public disgrace. When Emma was called to testify, she walked to the witness stand with the same purposeful stride she'd developed for her college interviews, her volunteer work presentations, and the speaking engagements, where she shared her story with other young survivors. Her voice was clear and steady as she recounted the facts of her abuse, the impact it had on her life, and the healing journey that had brought her to this moment. "The defense has suggested that your testimony was influenced by your mother or your therapist," Mark's attorney said during cross-examination. "How can you be certain that your memories are accurate, rather than suggestions planted by adults who believed they were helping you?" Emma looked directly at the attorney, her gaze unwavering. "Sir, trauma memories aren't suggestions. They're burned into your brain like photographs you never wanted to take. I can tell you exactly what my father's hands felt like, what cologne he wore, what he whispered when he violated my trust. Those aren't details that someone else could have given me. They're mine, and they're true, and no amount of legal maneuvering will change that." A murmur ran through the courtroom, and Emma saw several of the appellate judges nod slightly. Mark's attorney pressed on, but Emma answered every question with the same calm certainty, her testimony creating a record that would be difficult for any court to dismiss as unreliable or coached. When the hearing ended, Emma and Sarah waited outside the courthouse with their supporters, while the 3-judge panel deliberated. The decision came quickly. Just 2 hours later, the court clerk announced that the conviction was upheld. Mark's appeal had been denied, and he would serve the remainder of his sentence. Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. "It's over," she whispered to Sarah, and for the first time in 3 years, the words felt completely true. 5 years later, Dr. Emma Chen Martinez stood at the podium of the National Conference on Child Protection, looking out at an audience of social workers, attorneys, law enforcement officers, and advocates who had gathered to learn about innovative approaches to supporting young survivors. At 23, she had just completed her doctorate in clinical psychology with a specialization in trauma recovery, her dissertation focusing on the long-term outcomes for adolescents who disclosed family abuse. "When I was 15, Emma began, her voice carrying clearly through the conference hall, "I ran away from home because I couldn't find words to tell my mother that my father was sexually abusing me. I sat in a laundromat at 2 in the morning, trying to decide whether to buy a bus ticket to nowhere or go home and continue living with a secret that was killing me from the inside." The audience was completely silent. Hundreds of professionals, who had heard countless trauma stories, but recognized something special in Emma's presence: her ability to speak from both personal experience and clinical expertise. What saved me wasn't just my mother's belief when she finally learned the truth. What saved me was a community of people who understood that healing requires more than just removing a child from danger. It requires rebuilding their sense of safety, their ability to trust, their understanding of their own worth. Emma's presentation focused on the trauma-informed treatment center she had established with Sarah's help, a facility that provided comprehensive services to young survivors and their non-offending family members. The center offered individual and family therapy, legal advocacy, educational support, and peer counseling programs led by older survivors who had successfully navigated their own healing journeys. "We call it the Opening Doors Center," Emma explained, "because trauma closes so many possibilities in a young person's life. Our goal is to help them open those doors again, to show them that what happened to them doesn't have to define what happens next." In the audience, Sarah watched her daughter with tears in her eyes. At 49, Sarah had become one of the state's leading advocates for family court reform, working to ensure that custody decisions prioritize child safety over parental rights in cases involving abuse. Her law practice had grown into a firm employing 12 attorneys who specialized in representing survivors of domestic and family violence. After Emma's presentation, they had lunch together at a small cafe near the conference center. Emma had inherited Sarah's methodical nature, but combined it with a warmth and intuitive understanding that made her exceptionally effective with traumatized adolescents. "I have news," Emma said, her eyes bright with excitement. "The state legislature approved funding for 3 more Opening Doors centers. We'll be able to serve hundreds more families over the next 5 years." Sarah reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Your father would never have imagined that his crimes would ultimately lead to help for so many other children." It was one of the few times either of them mentioned Mark directly. He had been released from prison 18 months earlier, after serving 6 years of his 8-year sentence. He lived in a different state now, required to register as a sex offender, and prohibited from unsupervised contact with minors. Emma had received one letter from him, delivered through his attorney, in which he apologized for any harm my actions may have caused, and expressed hope that they might someday have a relationship again. Emma had read the letter once, and then burned it in the fireplace of her apartment. The apology was hollow, still refusing to take full responsibility, still minimizing the devastating impact of his choices. She had worked too hard to build a life free from his manipulation, to allow his continued presence in any form. "I got a letter from Madison Torres yesterday," Emma said, changing the subject to something that made her smile. "She's getting married next month, and she wants me to be her maid of honor." Madison had remained one of Emma's closest friends throughout high school and college, their relationship deepening once Emma was able to share the truth about why she had withdrawn during middle school. Madison was now a social worker specializing in child protective services, inspired partly by Emma's story and her own desire to help families in crisis. "That's wonderful," Sarah said. "It means so much that you were able to rebuild those friendships." Madison said something interesting in her letter, Emma continued. "She said that watching me find my voice taught her how to find hers. She's been speaking up more at work, advocating harder for her cases, refusing to accept when the system fails kids. This was perhaps Emma's greatest pride, not just her own healing, but the ripple effects of her courage on others. The scholarship fund Sarah had established in Emma's name had helped 43 young survivors attend college. Emma's speaking engagements had reached thousands of people who worked with children, changing how they recognized signs of abuse and responded to disclosures. The Opening Doors centers had served over 200 families, with outcome data showing remarkable success rates for long-term recovery. "I've been thinking about writing a book," Emma said. "Not a memoir exactly, but something that combines my personal experience with the clinical research I've been doing. Something that might help other families understand the healing process." Sarah nodded encouragingly. Emma had always been a gifted writer, her diary entries from that terrible time, showing a clarity and insight that had impressed even the seasoned prosecutors who had used them as evidence. "What would you call it?" Emma smiled. "I'm thinking Opening Doors, a survivor's guide to reclaiming your story. Because that's what healing really is, learning to author your own narrative instead of letting trauma write it for you." 8 years later, Sarah stood in the garden of Emma's new home, watching her daughter push her 3-year-old son on a swing set, while her husband David prepared dinner on the patio grill. Emma had met David in graduate school, a fellow psychology student who specialized in family therapy and who understood both her past and her commitment to helping other survivors. Little Michael had Sarah's dark hair and Emma's quick intelligence, his laughter ringing across the yard as his mother pushed him higher and higher toward the summer sky. Emma's face glowed with the kind of uncomplicated joy that Sarah had once feared they might never see again. "Higher, Mama!" Michael called out, his small hands gripping the swing chains with fearless determination. "Hold on tight, baby," Emma called back, her voice filled with the protective love that defined good parenting, love that watched for danger while encouraging growth, that created safety while allowing for adventure. Sarah thought about Mark, as she still did sometimes when she watched Emma with Michael. Mark would have been a grandfather now, might have been teaching Michael to throw a baseball or helping with homework, if he had been a different kind of man, if he had chosen love over violation, protection over predation. But the path that had brought them here, terrible as it had been, had also created something beautiful. Emma's work had touched thousands of lives. Sarah's legal advocacy had changed laws and court procedures that would protect countless children in the future. The Opening Doors centers had become a model replicated in 12 states, offering hope to families who had once felt completely alone. "Mom, come push Michael for a while," Emma called out. "I want to show you the new art therapy space I'm setting up in the basement." Sarah took over swing-pushing duty while Emma led her inside to see the room she was preparing for private practice clients. The basement had been transformed into a warm, welcoming space with comfortable seating, art supplies organized in colorful bins, and natural light streaming through windows that Emma had specifically requested when they bought the house. "No doors that lock from the outside," Emma explained when Sarah commented on the room's openness. "Glass panels in all the doors so kids can see out and know they're not trapped. Multiple exit routes clearly marked. Everything designed to help them feel safe enough to begin healing." The attention to detail that trauma had taught Emma was now being used to create healing spaces for others. She understood viscerally what frightened children needed: predictability, transparency, choices, and adults who believed them completely. "I'm going to start taking clients next month," Emma said. "Just a few at first, teenage girls mostly. Dr. Martinez is referring some cases to me." Dr. Martinez, now in her 70s, had become like family to them both. She had attended Emma's wedding, had been present for Michael's birth, and continued to serve as a mentor and friend. Her retirement had been delayed partly because she wanted to see Emma fully established in her own practice before stepping back. "You know," Emma said as they returned to the backyard, "sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't run away that night, if you hadn't found my diary." Sarah considered the question seriously. "I think you would have found another way to save yourself. You were always strong, Em. The trauma didn't create your strength. It just forced you to discover it earlier than any child should have to." "Maybe, but I'm glad it happened the way it did." I'm glad you found me in that laundromat instead of getting on a bus to nowhere. They watched Michael play in the sandbox David had built, his small hands shaping castles and roads with the focused concentration that reminded Sarah so much of Emma at that age. He was growing up in a house where adults told the truth, where secrets weren't kept, where his body belonged to himself and no one else had the right to touch him inappropriately. "He'll never have to carry the kind of secrets I carried," Emma said, following Sarah's gaze. "David and I talk about that a lot. How to protect him without making him afraid of the world. How to teach him about boundaries and consent in age-appropriate ways." The conversation was interrupted by David calling them to dinner. As they gathered around the patio table, Michael chattering about his day at preschool while the adults shared updates on their work and plans for the weekend, Sarah marveled at the ordinary beauty of it all. This was what healing looked like. Not the absence of scars, but the ability to build something beautiful despite them. Emma carried her trauma history like a scar that had strengthened rather than weakened her, using her experience to help others while creating a life filled with love, purpose, and genuine safety. 10 years later, the auditorium at the state capitol was packed with lawmakers, advocates, and survivors as Governor Patricia Martinez, no relation to Dr. Martinez, though the coincidence amused Emma, signed the Emma Chen Martinez Child Protection Act into law. The legislation mandated trauma-informed training for all professionals who worked with children, established funding for specialized treatment centers in every county, and created new legal protections for child witnesses in abuse cases. Emma, now 33 and the mother of 2 children, stood at the governor's side as the bill she had spent 3 years advocating for became official policy. Michael, now 8 and wise beyond his years, held his baby sister Lucy, while David took pictures to commemorate the moment. "This law will save lives," Governor Martinez said during her remarks. "It will ensure that no child has to face abuse alone, that families have access to the resources they need for healing, and that our systems respond to trauma with understanding rather than further harm." Sarah, now 59 and preparing for her own retirement, watched from the audience with tears of pride. Emma's journey from a terrified 15-year-old running away in the rain to a nationally recognized advocate standing beside the governor represented not just personal healing, but systemic change that would protect generations of children. After the ceremony, they gathered for dinner at Emma's house, now a sprawling property that included the main residence, David's private practice office, and a guest house where Sarah often stayed when she visited. The Opening Doors Foundation had grown into a national organization with treatment centers in 32 states, and Emma's book had become required reading in social work and psychology programs across the country. "Tell me about the man who hurt you," Michael had asked Emma on his 8th birthday, old enough now to understand that his family's work helping other people came from their own experience with something difficult. Emma had sat with him in the garden where Sarah now watched Lucy take her first steps, choosing her words with the same care she brought to everything involving her children's emotional development. "My father made choices that hurt me when I was a teenager," Emma had explained. "He used his power as my dad in ways that were wrong and harmful. It took me a long time to heal from that, but healing taught me how to help other kids who went through similar things." "Are you still hurt by it?" Michael had asked with the directness that children brought to difficult topics. "Not in the same way," Emma had answered honestly. "The hurt changed into something else, into strength, into purpose, into love for the family I built with Daddy, and for you and Lucy. Sometimes bad things happen, but that doesn't mean good things can't grow from them." It was a philosophy that had guided Emma's entire adult life, the understanding that trauma didn't have to be the end of the story, that healing was possible, that even the worst experiences could be transformed into sources of strength and service to others. Now, as they celebrated the signing of legislation that would protect countless children, Sarah reflected on how far they had all traveled from that rainy night when she had found Emma's diary and learned that everything she thought she knew about their family was a lie. Mark was still alive, though they had no contact with him. He had served his full sentence and now lived quietly in another state, his name on registries that would follow him for the rest of his life. Emma had no interest in seeing him or speaking with him, having long ago moved beyond any need for his acknowledgement or apology. Her healing had come from within, from the community she had built around herself, from the work she did to ensure that other children didn't suffer as she had suffered. "Mom," Emma said, joining Sarah on the porch while the children played in the yard, "I have something to tell you." Sarah looked at her daughter's glowing face and immediately understood. "Another baby?" Emma nodded, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat belly. 3 months along. We wanted to wait until after the bill signing to announce it." Sarah pulled Emma into a fierce hug, thinking about the grandchild who would grow up in a world slightly safer than the one Emma had inherited, in a family defined by truth and protection and unconditional love. "This baby is going to be so lucky," Sarah said, "to have you and David as parents, to have Michael and Lucy as siblings, to grow up knowing that they're valued and protected and believed." As the sun set over Emma's garden, 3 generations of their family gathered around the dinner table, sharing stories and making plans and creating new memories that would define the children's understanding of what family could be at its best. The trauma that had once threatened to destroy them had instead been transformed into a foundation for building something beautiful and lasting and full of hope. Emma looked around the table at her family, her husband who loved her completely, her children who would never know the fear she had carried, her mother who had chosen to believe and protect rather than doubt and deny, and felt the deep satisfaction that came from not just surviving, but thriving beyond anything she had once thought possible. The diary that had started their journey toward truth was now preserved in Emma's office, a reminder of how powerful it could be when someone finally found the courage to speak their truth and someone else found the courage to listen. It sat on a shelf next to Emma's published book, her doctoral diploma, photos from the Opening Doors centers, and letters from survivors whose lives had been changed by the work Emma had built from her own healing. The last entry in that diary had been about choosing herself, about finding the courage to save her own life. Now, 23 years later, Emma understood that choosing herself had ultimately been choosing all the other children who would benefit from her survival, her healing, her transformation of trauma into service. In the garden outside, Michael pushed Lucy on the same swing set where he had played as a toddler, their laughter echoing across a yard where children could play without fear, where love meant protection rather than violation, where the doors were always open, and the secrets had finally been spoken aloud. As darkness fell and the family moved inside to continue their celebration, Sarah thought about the question that had haunted her for years. How could she have missed the signs of Emma's abuse? She had finally made peace with the answer. Predators were skilled at deception, systems were designed to protect perpetrators rather than victims, and love could be used as a weapon as easily as a shield. But she had also learned that healing was possible, that courage was contagious, that one person's decision to speak the truth could change the world for countless others. Emma had chosen to transform her pain into purpose, and that choice had created ripples that would protect children for generations to come. The purple diary, worn now with age and handling, held the words that had started their journey toward justice and healing. But the real story, the story of survival and recovery and service to others, was still being written every day in the lives Emma touched, the families she helped heal, the children who would grow up safer because she had found the courage to speak. Emma Chen Martinez, now 43 and a grandmother herself, stood before the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, addressing delegates from around the world about the global epidemic of child sexual abuse and the importance of trauma-informed response systems. "When I was 15, she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades transforming personal pain into public service, I believed that my only choice was between silence and destruction. I learned that there was a third option, truth that leads to healing, not just for individuals, but for communities, for systems, for the world." Her granddaughter, Michael's 4-year-old daughter Emma Rose, sat in the audience next to Sarah, now 74, but still sharp and engaged, still practicing law part-time and mentoring young attorneys who wanted to specialize in family protection cases. 4 generations of their family were represented in that room, living proof that trauma could be survived, that healing could span generations, that speaking the truth was always, eventually worth the cost. The Opening Doors Foundation now operated in 47 countries, training hundreds of thousands of professionals in trauma-informed care and helping millions of families navigate the aftermath of abuse. Emma's research on long-term recovery outcomes had changed how mental health professionals understood resilience, and her advocacy work had influenced international policies on child protection. But perhaps most importantly, the little girl who had once run away in the rain believing that her only value was keeping someone else's secret, had grown into a woman who understood that her greatest gift to the world was her refusal to stay silent. As Emma concluded her address to the UN delegates, she looked out at the audience and saw faces from every continent, representatives of communities where children were still learning that they had the right to be protected, the right to be believed, the right to speak their truth without shame. "Every child deserves what I eventually found," Emma said, her words carrying across the assembly hall and into the record of international policy. "A voice that is heard, a truth that is believed, and a community that will move heaven and earth to ensure their safety. This is not an impossible dream. This is a choice we make, one child at a time, one family at a time, one law at a time." In the audience, Sarah held her great-granddaughter close and remembered the woman she had been 28 years ago, working late into the night while her daughter suffered in silence just 3 rooms away. That woman couldn't have imagined this moment, couldn't have envisioned the global movement that would grow from one teenager's purple diary and one mother's decision to believe. The diary itself was now part of an exhibit at the Smithsonian Institution, displayed alongside other artifacts that had changed American history. Visitors could read selected excerpts, with Emma's permission, and learn about the legislation, treatment innovations, and international policies that had grown from one girl's courage to document her truth. But the real legacy wasn't in museums or policy papers or even in the thousands of children who had been helped by the programs Emma had created. The real legacy was in the granddaughters sleeping peacefully in Sarah's lap, in the great-granddaughter who would grow up in a world where speaking about abuse was met with belief rather than doubt, where seeking help was seen as strength rather than weakness, where healing was understood to be not just possible but inevitable, when the right support was provided. As the delegates filed out of the assembly hall, many stopping to shake Emma's hand and share their own stories of survival and service, Sarah thought about the question that had driven their entire journey. What would have happened if Emma hadn't found the courage to run away that night, if Sarah hadn't found the diary, if they hadn't chosen truth over comfort and justice over silence? The answer, she now understood, was that some other child somewhere else would have had to carry that burden instead. Emma's courage hadn't just saved her own life. It had saved the lives of countless other children who would now grow up in a world slightly more willing to listen, slightly more prepared to help, slightly more committed to breaking the cycles of abuse that had once seemed unbreakable. The rain that had fallen on that terrible night 28 years ago had seemed like an ending, washing away their illusions of safety, their comfortable lies, their faith in the fundamental goodness of the world. But it had actually been a beginning, the first drops of a flood that would eventually wash away systems designed to protect perpetrators rather than victims, silence designed to preserve reputation rather than children's lives, and complicity disguised as family loyalty. Emma's story had become everyone's story. Proof that one person's decision to speak the truth could change the world for millions of others, who needed someone to show them that healing was possible, that justice was worth fighting for, and that the courage to break silence was the first step toward breaking cycles of harm that had persisted for generations. As they left the United Nations building and walked into the New York evening, 4 generations of women who had learned that love meant protection rather than possession, that families were built on truth rather than secrets, and that the most powerful force in the world was a survivor who had transformed their pain into purpose and their healing into hope for others. The Purple Diary had fallen open 28 years ago to reveal secrets that shattered a family's illusions but ultimately saved not just one girl's life, but the lives of countless others who would benefit from her courage, her healing, and her refusal to let trauma have the final word in her story. We hope this story has moved you and opened your eyes to important family dynamics. If you've stayed with us through this entire journey, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more powerful stories like this one.